I'm going to talk a little about Kenai Brown Bear genetics. I'm going to talk about some black bear stuff. Some of the things that we run into with management, especially in the last couple of years, that have really hit home to a lot of us, and how the department, and myself in particular, is working on a lot of those. I presume you can hear me okay, and I'm not muffling the mic okay. Thanks. Great. Well, we always wish this is what our lab or our field site could be like, but that's not always the case, especially when you're working on black bears in Anchorage, but it's nice to think about it. You know, this little template here, which I stole from Karen Road, one of my former grad students, really typifies how we kind of look at what's going on in a bear's life. And of the things that are really important through here, these are all things that the bears are looking to handle. What I'm doing on the Kenai right now, and have for the last 10 years, is looking at the reproduction, the population dynamics, because we want to know, are we harvesting an appropriate number of bears down there? Can we harvest more bears down there? So the little squares are places that brown bears have been captured on the Kenai for research work going back to 1995, well before my particular time. And really the take-home message here is that there are a few openings in there, but for the most part we've managed to cover the peninsula in its entirety. We use helicopters to catch them. You'll see the brown bear. It's going to pop up in the lower left corner, upper left corner there. That's usually what I do, although I do snare brown bears and black bears, and I use barrel traps as well. This is a picture of a snare that we set up off a testometer. You can see the spring right there. And this is what it looked like the next day after you catch one, because the brown bears don't like being caught in snares. And these are not lethal snares, obviously. They're aldrich footholds. And it's quite an event, let me tell you. When we do a lot of the captures, it's in the springtime. The females are in estrus. And because the males are out searching for them, we often have to sling the females quite a ways away, downwind, to break the scent trail, because while she's incapacitated from the drugs, the male could come by and end up taking her out and killing her. We haven't had that happen yet, but I've had more than a fair share of really persistent brown bear males that just keep coming back again and again and again. And in the rare cases, I'll dart them as well. We try to avoid that if we can. So it's a lot of effort goes into working on it. One of the take-home messages is female survivorship. The males don't count for, sorry guys, we don't count for diddly. We're cheap to make, we don't contribute much to the reproductive effort, which is true, and the females really don't need you but for a little brief period of time, and that's it. It's female survivorship is the big one. And this graph here shows what I've figured out for survivorship for the last couple of years or so. And it's really good. Even though there's bouncing all over, the average is about 95%, which is pretty high for a brown bear population. What that means is if you are a brown bear female and you can make it to adulthood, you're probably going to die of old age or close to it. That one big dip here, that came about when we started the bear baiting again up on the Kenai, and there was a couple of years where a fair number of females were taken. This is some of the stuff, the data on the demographics, and really the most important thing to look at here is at the very bottom. If you're a cub of the year, a coy, you got a little better than a 50% chance of making it alive that first year, maybe 60%. As you get older and get bigger, there are fewer things that can eat you. When you're a coy, you're just a little bit of popcorn running around out there. Eagles are going to take you, just about everything. Coyotes will take you if they can. You put on some body mass, you get bigger as a yearling, and your survival goes up. When you're a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, you're virtually guaranteed that you're okay if you stay with mom. We don't have the data, and that's the next step for a lot of the research I want to do with Jeff Selinger. He's the area biologist down there, is what's the survivorship after you get weaned? And we know it drops off. You go really poor. And that's where the crux comes in. And if you look at some of the data for the bears that have been caught or killed the last couple of years, harvested, we're taking a significant number of subadult females. They're teenagers, they're not the brightest things out there, and neither are the subadult males. And they get into trouble and they'll come up to bait stations much more readily than adults. And so that earlier graphic about 94%, This is going to drop way down and then climb back to 94 as they become adults. Oh yeah, one of the first things that hit me when I took this job was the Center for Biological Diversity said Kenai brown bears were a unique subspecies and should be given special protection. And so I joined forces with Dr. Sandy Talbot from the USGS Molecular Ecology Lab, and we asked the question, how genetically unique are the Kenai brown bears? And I'm going to whip through a couple of things here, but the take-home message is that first, we tested to see if there were separate subpopulations north and south of Tustamina, and we could demonstrate that no, there weren't. It's all one big homogeneous mass. The relative genetic, what we call it heterozygosity, you can think of it relationships, among the Kenai brown bears is what you would expect for a peninsular population. That means they're not as isolated as, say, Kodiak bears are amongst other bears, but they are more isolated than Unit 13 brown bears are. But the good take-home message on that is they're on the spectrum of normality, if you will, for what you'd expect from that population. And that saved us quite a bit. Now in Anchorage, we have a lot of bears at different times over the seasons, and over the last couple of years, our population's been going up and down. And I've been asked by J Bear, Department of Defense, to do some different amounts of research with them, and I'm keenly interested in a lot of the Anchorage bears. So it started with a project where we were asked how many bears at a minimum are here? Not a population count, but can we come up with a minimum number of bears? What's important for them in terms of the diet? And one thing that we learned is that you can take what are called opportunistic samples for genetics without handling the bear. And if you collect enough of those, you can build up a profile of that population. And so this is on 6 Mile Creek, and I'm going to show you a close-up there. That's a hare that was left by a bear that was cruising the creek looking for salmon. And we're able to get, Sandy Talbot is, at her staff, genetic profile from that bear. So if you ever touch him again, you can identify it, you know where he'd been. And that comes into play in some of the stuff we've done. So most of the research that I'm talking about is to the west of that red line. And one of the first things that came out of it is we went out and did opportunistic hare sampling in Bicentennial Park, along the streams, on J Bear, on 6 Mile, and we got about 1,500 to 2,000 hare samples, which yielded about 150 useful amounts of DNA to do identification with, if you will. And what we found, before the study, I would have said we get about 5 brown bears coming into Bicentennial Park in a year for the fish. Instead, what we found is that between those 3 circles down to about here, we had at least 35 brown bears, individuals. And it's not a population count, that's the minimum number, because I don't have an estimate of how many bears we didn't get hair from. So it's a minimum count. And this was several years ago, and these populations do cycle, but we were surprised to see that. And in fact, there's some fairly large brown bears that are out there. This is one that was in a barrel trap. We didn't know he was injured at the time, but he'd run into a much larger bear. When I handle these animals, I take samples from them to help me determine what their diet happens to be. And that's what this signifies, is that if you're a brown bear, and you guys hunt, so this is sort of like a duh moment. Fish are important, boosts are important, and berries are important at different times of the year. Garbage didn't pop up out of here. We didn't really get any great signature for anything like that. These are some of the older trails. There are a lot more newer ones now in Bicentennial Park. And I put out a lot of GPS collars on a lot of these brown bears. And as you'd imagine, they like to use the trails as well. And so this is leading into some of the issues we're having, obviously, with bears in Bicentennial Park and in the town, is that we're sharing space with them. A lot of people didn't believe a lot of this data when it first came out, simply because you don't see the bears. We're a visually oriented species. You walk down a trail, you don't see a bear, you don't think they're there. They could be 10 feet off in the bush. They are smelling you, they're hearing you, and if they're lucky, they'll see you. We don't see them, they don't exist. So I have GPS tracks showing the bear moving off of the trail while somebody comes down it and then come back out on the trail. This demonstrates through some of the math, the locations that we collected, This is the date down here, and the graph is how far from the salmon stream are the bears. And basically what you see is that around the end of June, when the fish show up, the bears are basically right on the salmon stream, and that's where they stay until the berries ripen and then they leave. One of the questions that I wanted to ask about this is, well, how important is garbage versus natural foods to these bears? And so we field tested these cameras that you hang on the bear. And I'm going to show you a whole series of clips that we've taken where I put them on the bears, black bears and brown bears, and then turn them loose to see what we could learn about what was really important to them in the Anchorage area. Because location doesn't give that to us alone. And so that's a black bear, a little black bear. They're big, bulky things. They're bears, only have to wear them for part of the summer. The bottom two ones here, I was testing to see how well they would fare. That was a black bear up on top. The brown bears are much more difficult to get data from. They chewed up their collars. And so you'll see some pictures where you're going to see the muzzle of the bear, maybe its tongue and a forearm to give you an orientation of what it's going to be. And that's what a few of them look like when they're wearing the collars. Like I said, they don't have to wear them all summer. But it was really kind of interesting. I mean, here they are. This is crossing northern lights out by the rustic goat somewhere. It's kind of fun watching it. Oh, this is one. I can't take credit for this one. It's going to be a little hard to see, you know, the Google Maps and the Google Street View. This is taken by the Google car. And somebody pointed out to me that there's a brown bear here and there. 2-year-olds or yearlings, yearlings I'd say, and I don't know where mom is, but she's been around. And that's somebody's garage sale, and that's off of Muldoon. Yeah. So we get pictures of, this is from a bear that's in his den, looking out early in the year. This is a bear that was in a camp, which has been a real issue for us because human attractants, both in camps and in people's houses, is what draws the bears in. This is a bear that's chowing down on that invasive chokecherry that's found along almost all the green belts around Anchorage or in people's yards. So I think they still sell them in town as an ornamental. And then, of course, anything they can get that's food related, they're going to go for it. Black bears are pretty opportunistic that way. A little white bread sandwich of some sort. Believe it or not, there's some peanut butter that goes with this, but I'm not going to show that. So the question came back, well, what's going on with the bears? What's really important to them? And for black bears, because again, the brown bears destroyed their cameras, they spend most of their time foraging for berries later in the year. They have a lot less time invested in getting animal foods. They're not going for the salmon like the brown bears do. And then obviously in between with the sedges and grasses, a lot of dandelions, a lot of equisetum. All the things that you'd expect to see as you walk along our green belts or in the different parks. Devil's Club is a real biggie in the fall. The black bears in particular really love that stuff. They go crazy. We look forward to it because that's when all of our problem calls drop off, because the bears abandon the city for the most part and head on out to wherever they can get it. We were interested in how active they were, or it turns out they aren't. This is actually in the backyard of somebody's house off of Northern Lights. I went radio tracking the bear, and it took me about 20 minutes in their yard, being really frustrated before I looked up and saw it. It was just, he wasn't sleeping, he was just looking at me like that. But this is an interesting little graph that comes out of that, is that if you look at it, they actually spend a fair amount of time doing nothing. Not much at all. They rest. They go to bed about midnight and they get up at 8. And they're pretty much like clockwork, which was really surprising to me. And it turns out that in terms of occurrence in their diet, not ecological or nutritional value, we haven't figured that out, but in terms of what's showing up at what they're eating more natural foods than they are anything that's related to humans, i.e. trash. So we have a lot of stuff that's attractive to bears in our green belts that is there as long as it's a green belt, because frankly, Anchorage is sitting in the middle of a big bear factory, which is everything all around us, even though we're a large city. I'm going to talk about the potential safety issue. and the real safety issue. And you know, people and bears, it's pretty, everybody's really funny about it, how they handle it. Funny isn't the way to describe it. People are different and odd, and I don't necessarily condone a lot of how people handle themselves around bears, but part of it isn't my business either. But because we have so many bears that can come into town or can be seen or interacted with out of town, you're going to see a lot of different behaviors. This is a real famous photo that you might remember from several years ago, and I'm sure a lot of people here know Charlie. And he did a lot of stuff that I wouldn't recommend at all, but he got away with it. But we have bears like that in Anchorage. We have bears that size and bigger. This is a bear that electrocuted himself just off the end of the Ted Stevens runway at International. For some reason, he decided to dig up a power line and he bit into it. And he was a good-sized male. That bear that had the big wound in his back that I caught, I actually caught him in a barrel trap off the O'Malley golf course. Moose Run. He got hit and killed by a car. This is right next to where Cal Worthington Ford used to be on Seward, the old Seward Highway. And that's the bike path behind me there. Notice this is one of our barrel traps. I want to show you the size of a particular bear. That's Chris there, and he's about a couple inches taller than me for a size reference. And you can see where he's standing, his height relative to that trap. This is a big boar that came in later that night that wouldn't go in the trap because it was too small. We're actually trying to buy a larger trap. We don't catch some of the big ones with traps because they just won't go in there. The traps are too small. That's just up on Highland, up the hill, not on Highland, it's up the road above Huffman. This guy got hit by a car and killed at Hanshu Middle School, across from Fred Meyer's. And this is a guy I collared just below the ski lift at Arctic Valley. And I put a collar on him, and he wore it for a couple days. They're like football linemen, their necks are bigger than their heads, so they just pop those babies right off after a couple days. And that photo isn't one of those hunting type photos that you guys all take where you stand way back, you know, so it looks big. He's a very large male, and we picked up his DNA in Bicentennial Park going after fish, which makes sense, you know. All these bears that have been hit and killed, you know about, they're not lost. They're 15 to 18 years old. They're adult males, adult females. They're in their home range. They just had the unfortunate chance of getting hit by a car, you know, dark 30 or so. And so they're not lost. They're not wandering out. They're not subadults going out getting into trouble and stuff. And, you know, that's the infamous Rover's Run, where we get a lot of bears that go down because the fish are right there on the stream. So, you know, you guys are all bear hunters. You're here for a particular reason. And so, in one sense, I'm kind of preaching to the choir. In the other sense, it's just drive home the fact that, yeah, we have a lot of bears in Anchorage at various times as the populations go up and down, and they're probably going to start going down a little. I think, what did Dave tell me? I think they took a total of 70 or so black bears were taken last year in the Anchorage area at 14C. Most of it would be Eagle River here and out toward Girdwood. But keep in mind that Pennsylvania, which has a lot of black bears, killed about 4,000 last year, and they've been killing about 3,500 to 4,000 every year for the last 10 years. And while Pennsylvania is bigger than 14C, it's not that much bigger. Black bears can reproduce like crazy. They reproduce much more quickly than brown bears do. The mom will cut the cubs loose at a much earlier age than the female brown bear will. And so black bears will recover very quickly population-wise. They're not susceptible as like some brown bears are, populations. And as long as the food's there, they're going to take off like gangbusters. Well, the last little thing that I end up doing, more on a somber note, is something that we found is that when somebody gets attacked and somebody's mauled or heaven forbid, there's a fatality, we want to find the bear that's responsible, and if it's something that warrants it, we'll take it out of the population, we'll kill it. In order to do that, we have to identify that animal, and through a lot of the genetics work that I've done, we've worked up several routines where we can take samples. I work with the the victims and their clothing. I work with a medical examiner, and we take samples so that we can then develop a genetic profile. I'm going to show you a fairly long clip here, because this is what, of the bear feeding, this is what cued me into the fact that we could do that sort of stuff. If you look at that bear real quickly, you see it drool right there? This is going to show several other things where it's eating, but the bears drool a lot when they're doing attacking, when they're biting, when they're feeding. They end up doing a lot of drooling. And so what we're able to do is take samples of that for DNA analysis after the fact, much later. And it's been fairly useful for us as we do it. You can see the bears in somebody's truck. The same bear came back the next day, the garbage was gone. He was pretty bummed about it. And this is part of some other part of a clip there that I didn't know how to cut it off, sorry. But there you saw him take a big drool there, and he's going to do it one more time. And so that's what we basically are able to exploit, that and any hair that they might leave. And so with Sandy and her staff at the USGS, we've published a couple of papers on this, and we do it now as a routine matter of fact. And it isn't just bears, although bears are really biggie. This is a video, come on baby, of a wolf that I collared a couple of years ago that for a while moved into town, and that was the Peanut Farm underpass that it just ran underneath. So, and it likes the trails, obviously. I mean, you know, wouldn't you? Why go bushwhacking? You got something like that. And it is rare, it's very rare, but Alaska, unfortunately, is one of the few places that we've had a fatal wolf attack. That was many years ago at Chicknick Lake. That's when we first started doing a lot of our stuff. So, you just never know what animals are gonna up to, what they can pull off. So, I don't know if I gave you any insights on the bear baiting and what to feed, but I can answer any questions, because actually I do bait a lot. But I don't shoot them lethally, but I want to catch them. And I've actually done a fair amount of it, so. Yes, sir?
What's your favorite bear bait?
My favorite bear bait? Well, depends what I'm going for. If when I did the foot snaring, I did that with Laverne Beyer, who's our master snarer from Fish and Game. He's retired, but he's still available. We didn't bait the snares properly. We didn't bait the snares properly because it wasn't a lethal take. We want the foot. But we put salmon off to the side because the run had failed that year. So I brought in a bunch of fish just to get the scent going. And then we caught, oh gosh, it was like 90% brown bears and one black bear out of the whole thing. When I'm doing the barrel trapping, if we want black bears, we do everything that's sweet. We do the anise, we do the donuts, that whole 9 yards. When we were on J Bear, they had a Cinnabon at the time. And the guys would go get the Cinnabons, and it was all I could do at times to keep them from eating them. But there's something about the Cinnabon, I don't know how they make it, but it's really strong and really sweet. We would get black bears repeatedly, and very rare to get a brown bear. If we wanted a brown bear, we put in a fish or a moose calf, some sort of meat that had some age to it. And it's a very clear distinction. I mean, it's worked really well for me. The difference for us is that we aren't feeding them to come back again and again, because they're set up so once they take the food, hopefully they're caught right away. Whereas when you're baiting for hunting, you want them to be there, coming repeatedly, so when you finally show up, you got a chance to run into them.